Hi, this is Reverend Dr. Nadine Rosechild-Sullivan, and I'm coming to you with a reading from my book, Passing the Baton, Birth Control, Precondition of the Liberation of Women. And I'm coming with a narrative tonight. It is the story of a young woman, of a girl really, who was 17 years old and who was living in a country outside of the United States, in a space where abortion was illegal. And it is the story of her situation. Begins on page 69, and it is called Clandestine Hole in the Wall. And she says, they had a sort of sex ed in my high school. I had started in Catholic school, but by high school I was in a relatively elite Methodist school. My parents cared about education, and they cared for me. They wanted the best for me. We were solidly middle class, but the tuition was always a small struggle. They told me, you are every bit as good as everyone there, but we won't be taking the kinds of vacations your classmates do. In the 1980s, many of the more elite kids traveled each summer to Disney World, Orlando. To Brazilians, such a trip was quite expensive. We were fine, but we didn't have it like that. Our sex ed class talked about the basics of reproduction. There were sketches of how the internal organs of each sex were shaped, but there was no contraceptive information. Condoms were available in drugstores, but it would have been humiliating for a girl to walk in, pick up a pack, and buy them. She would have been slut-shamed. Later on, and as a full adult, aware of the need for safer sex, I would become the woman who had a condom in her purse and who said, you're going to wear this to a partner. But not at 17. My mother, though, had come to me and said, sex is good. But if you decide to begin having sex, I want you to come to me. I'll take you to the doctor and get you birth control. You just have to tell me. But I hadn't. Somehow, I couldn't say that to my mom. Marcos was my first real boyfriend. He wasn't a one-night stand. He was a real long-term boyfriend, the kind you think about having a life with, the kind you want to marry. I was a senior in high school and he was 3 years older, an engineering student already working in an internship, but it was a time when no one had a consciousness of safe sex, not in Brazil. In the early 80s, information had drifted in from the States about GRID, and then the terminology had changed to HIV and AIDS. But in my mind, and in the mind of all those I knew, that only affected gay people and addicts who use needles and hemophiliacs. It didn't have anything to do with straight people, especially not a young straight couple enthralled in their first real love affair. And every other sexually transmissible disease of which I was aware was curable with a simple antibiotic. There was no talk of herpes or HPV either. So we had sex unprotected. As for pregnancy, somehow I didn't really think it could happen to me. In the arrogance of my youthfulness, I didn't think I was fertile, or I wondered about it. I just didn't feel like it could happen to me. I had plans. Not going to college was not an option. I just knew I was going to college, steady boyfriend or no, I had career plans. Marrying Marcos was somewhere far down the timeline in those plans. At first, I didn't realize I was pregnant, not until I missed my period. Even then, it took me a few days to think about it, but I started to notice the very telling small changes in my body. Almost immediately, my stomach had a small bump, and my breasts got tender in a way they hadn't been. And the shampoo I used every morning, the smell of it, started to make me nauseous. When I started to worry, Marcos had an aunt who worked as a nurse and she helped me find a doctor. This was before you could walk into a drugstore and pick up a pregnancy test. You had to actually go to a gynecologist to be diagnosed as pregnant. The doctor ordered a blood test, and when I went back for the results, he told me I was very pregnant, about 4 weeks. He offered me no options. Knowing I was 17, he didn't ask if I needed help telling my parents. He didn't discuss adoption. He simply told me matter-of-factly and let me walk out of there completely unprepared for what I was facing. Marcos and I began to talk about what we could do. His sister, about 2 years older than him, began to tell us to just get married. But I wanted to finish high school, and I had to go to college. I was suffused in a whirlwind of conflicting feelings. I had always been pro-choice, but somewhere in the midst of all my emotions, I let myself wonder if it would be a girl or a boy. Then I would stop myself and think, but I am just a kid myself. I've always been a very rational person, but then, even then, at 17, I was quite rational. I asked myself, how could I have a kid and raise a kid before I was prepared to care for a kid? Marcos was wonderfully supportive. He was a really good boyfriend. I don't know how I would have made it through that time without his emotional and at times physical, as in physically holding me up, support. He kept saying, whatever you decide, I'll help you through this. And he did. There seemed so little we could do. Abortion was illegal nationwide. It was a Catholic country. It was a misogynistic country. It was the machismo country. Getting pregnant was considered to be the woman's fault. If unmarried, she was shamed and she was supposed to pay the social price. A woman caught and convicted of an illegal abortion faced jail time. As a nation, we were just out from under a military dictatorship. We actually finally had a civilian in the position of oversight, not an elected civilian, but a civilian nonetheless. In that time and place, women had few rights. I decided not to carry, but we had to be very careful. I told no one. Marcos told his aunt and an older man at work who knew a place. It was a super clandestine, a real hole in the wall. But we didn't have the money. For us, the price was huge. And we didn't have much time either. I was already 4 to 5 weeks pregnant. We scrambled for that money. We really got creative, raising the funds for my down low abortion. My dad had a retail store. My parents knew and liked Marcos. I told my dad we wanted to go on a trip to the beach and needed to make money for the trip. He offered me branded t-shirts and sweatshirts, and I sold some at school. While going through his things for things to sell, we found new blank VHS cassettes he had picked up in the States, and he let us have those. People were all about them. They wanted to tape their TV shows. Marcos sold some at work, and he told 2 of his cousins about our problem, and they pitched in and helped us sell. As a male, he didn't feel the shame I felt, the shame of being 17, unmarried and pregnant, the shame of being female, and in the eyes of critics, if they found out, no longer chaste. To this day, 30 years later, I have never told my parents. I never wanted to so disappoint them like that. The only person I ever told, other than Marcos's aunt, was my own aunt, my mother's sister, about 1 month after my procedure. She looked at me funny and in private asked, "Are you pregnant?" So I told her no. I had an abortion, even as I begged, "Please don't tell my mom." I don't think she ever did. But if she did, my mom's an even better secret keeper than me, because she's never said a word to me. Also, I sometimes think about how when I left home to go to college, I left my room set up, and in that room was my diary where I had chronicled the whole experience. I sometimes wonder if my mom ever went through my things, ever found or read that journal. But again, I won't ask, and if she did, she didn't tell. Whatever happened to us, unplanned pregnancy, sexual assault, domestic violence, it was always and only a woman's fault. We shouldn't have opened our legs. We shouldn't have dressed that way. We shouldn't have pissed him off. It took about 2 weeks, but with my dad's merchandise and Marco's cousin's help, we raised the money that a 17-year-old high school kid and a 20-year-old intern just didn't have on their own. Marcos went with me on the bus. I remember he couldn't come back with me into the treatment room. I remember not liking the feel of the place. I remember there was a female nurse or assistant of some kind, but she wasn't in the room for my exam, and I don't know if she was there for the procedure once I was under. I remember the examination table and the stirrups and the man between my legs with the bright lamp. I remember glancing around the room, seeing the vacuum aspirator, wondering if he were about to use that on me. I remember the doctor saying he would put me under general anesthesia. I remember my driving need for this to hurry up and be over both the pregnancy and the procedure. The next thing I remember, I was still half asleep and I was being led out the door. I can't remember the clinic having any concern for me after it was done. Was it even a clinic? There was no recovery room. I was simply put out on the street. Marcos steadied me, and we rode the bus back to his place, me propped up against him, mostly asleep. I would not have been able to get home alone. We had told my parents that we went to the beach. In actuality, we spent the weekend at his parents' house as they were away for the weekend. About 2 days later, I began to have the most horrible cramps. I literally thought they would kill me. I felt like someone was twisting my ovaries and uterus in a giant hand. The pain got so bad, Marcos had to take me back to the clinic where I explained how I was feeling, and the doctor told me I had a blood clot in there, and I would have to be put under again to have the clot removed. Again, I let him put me under general anesthesia. I look back and shudder, realizing I had no idea of the sanitation of the place, the antiseptic status of the equipment, or the ethics of the doctor. As far as I know, no one was with me, no other medical staff to keep him from abusing me. I don't have any indication that he did, but there also weren't any of the standard measures in place to assure that he didn't. And was it a blood clot? Or had he failed to remove all of the embryonic and placental tissue the first time around? And I had no options. There were no other clinics to choose from. Maybe women with more money might have had higher class options, but we had one solitary tip from the older man at Marcos's internship, pointing out where to go for an illegal, necessarily clandestine procedure that could have put either me, the patient, or the doctor in legal jeopardy of prison. And there was no internet. There was no way to do research. You hinted at people, and if they hinted back, you followed the clues to fill in the puzzle and hoped you succeeded at ending your unwanted pregnancy, surviving whatever was done to you, and not getting caught. Marcos and I broke up sometime later, not because of the pregnancy or the abortion, but because our lives moved on. I went on to college as he left college and moved forward in his career. There are times the 3-year age gap is small, and times it looms large. For us, it did us in. But we kept in touch. And one day, not so long ago, he sent me the news the doctor who had done my procedure had been arrested for having killed 2 women in their abortions. He's currently serving 10 to 15 years. After my abortion, I went on the pill and took it steadfastly for 20 years. Marcos married and had 1 child. I completed college, began my career, married, went to graduate school, then super late in my 30s, started to try to have a family. By then it was hard for me to get pregnant. My fertility specialist said, I have a tight cervix. Is my botched first or my second follow-up procedure to blame for that? My husband and I did 5 rounds of in vitro fertilization. All 5 failed. In vitro is a whole other kind of suffering for a woman, the harvesting of the eggs and the implantation made especially painful by a tight cervix. But I thank God because actually my husband was an asshole. And I'm grateful now not to be bound to him by children. If I had had children with him, I might not even be able to be in this country. In our divorce, he could have controlled my living arrangements and career in order to have access to his children. In my mind, the entire history of my reproductive health has to do with the fact that the abortion I accessed at 17 years old was neither safe nor legal. It has taken me these 30 years to come to terms with the repercussions of having to seek out a hole-in-the-wall back alley abortionist who likely failed to fully evacuate my uterus the first time around, a man who went on to be convicted of killing 2 patients. It was a journey to hell, for sure. On the other hand, I have and have always had a clear stance on a woman's right to choose. No man has a right to have a say. Men don't have to carry. Men don't have to labor. And if they want, men can simply walk away. It is the woman whose body is used, and it is her life trajectory that is inalterably changed. If we had not done the abortion, Marcos might have married me, and that would have impacted his career as well. But if I had not had the abortion, I could not have walked away. I would not have given up my child for adoption, and it would have been 10 or more years before I could ever have gone to college. I would have been a despised teenage mom, probably single, struggling to feed a child I couldn't afford. If I had kept the baby, would I have resented it? If Marcos had married me, would he have resented me, resented the baby? Would I have come to resent him? In retrospect, I am still terrified at what my life would have been if I, married or unmarried, had had a kid at 17 years old because I couldn't have accessed an abortion at all. And I am terrified at the kind of abortion I was forced to access: illegal, unsafe, potentially unsanitary, potentially deadly. I have never felt any Catholic guilt about having killed my child. I know it was an early embryo, and I could not have then given it the life it deserved. I am terrified at how close I came to bringing into the world one more unwanted, underattended child who could have grown up, messed up with that pain. I believe in the necessity of choice. I believe only the woman can make that choice. I have never regretted my choice, only my lack of safe options, free from shame. And I find it terrifying that here in the United States, the religious right is not only chiseling away at women's abortion rights, but at women's access to contraception itself. While in my native Catholic Brazil, abortion remains unsafe and illegal, but the birth control pill is available at the drugstore over the counter. And I am thankful that I did not die on that back alley abortionist table either time I had to lie there for the same abortion. Thank you.